Hi, Shalom. I decided it's time to sit down and tell my whole story from start to finish. This is probably going to end up being at least 3 or 4 videos. I need to do this in installments for my own mental well-being. I did do one interview in the spring of 2023, which I will link down below. I had every intention of applying for more interviews after that, but the rest of 2023 was a tad chaotic, to say the least. I feel like things are leveling out enough that I can start pursuing more interview opportunities, and having my full story out there will really help with that. There were things I experienced in the cultiverse that made me feel like I was insane, but I recently stumbled upon some interviews by people who had the exact same experiences with some of the same bullshit propaganda. So now I don't feel as crazy. At least not for that reason. But in order for that part of the story to make sense, I have to go back to the beginning. I live with raging complex PTSD from everything that's happened. So I will be knitting while I film the rest of this video, and I'm not even going to try to hide it if I start crying. I just realized I don't have tissues. I'm going to grab some, and I'll be right back. Bye. Okay, I'm back. This is part 1, which I am calling Lost Girl. In order to understand why I got into a cult, you need to understand the trauma of growing up with undiagnosed autism in the 90s. Women and girls with late diagnosed autism now call ourselves lost girls. And so we're clear any use of traditional gender binary terms is purely in context, and trans women are real women. Okay, moving on. So I've talked before about how acquired disability, hold on, comes with a grieving component, like my chronic pain or my vision loss. I can remember what it was like to be more active. I can remember how I engaged with the world when I was fully sighted. I was recently discussing this with my therapist, and he described my autism grief as mourning the loss of what could have / should have been. I'm pushing 40, and I feel like I am only just starting to become a happy, functioning human being. Everything I have in my life now, I should have had from day one. I'm mourning the loss of the person I could have been if society hadn't completely screwed me over and smashed my physical and mental health. I will tell you, my flabber was gasted when a friend's daughter was diagnosed while her age was still in the single digits. Contrary to the propaganda, autism is not on the rise. What's on the rise is actually taking the time to look for autism in girls. Mark my words. More frequent diagnosis is going to lead to a lot of positive changes being on the rise in the female population. We're going to see improved physical and mental health, more positive school experiences, lower rates of female substance abuse, lower rates of female inpatient psychiatric admissions, lower rates of female incarceration, lower rates of domestic violence, and above all, lower rates of females self-unaliving. Now, I identify as late diagnosed because I was diagnosed at age 13, which today is considered late. And in my mind, it is late enough in the sense that it was far too late to reverse the serious psychological damage from bullying and frustrated school staff. The scary part is most average people today know quite a bit more about autism than the experts during that time. Diagnostic criteria was limited. There was classic autism, which I guess is like the old film Rain Man, and then you have people like me with language ability that's, closer to normal or above normal ranges. The only other criteria at that time was PDD-NOS, pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified. Translation: something is up, but we have no idea what it is, and you're not impaired enough for us to want to help you. Gee, thanks. That's super helpful. In the late 90s and onward, the diagnosis of Asperger's syndrome became more widespread. I received an AS diagnosis in 2001 when I was 13. They don't use Asperger's as a diagnosis anymore for a number of reasons, but I sometimes still use that term for context when I'm talking about my own diagnosis. All right, I've got lots of trigger warnings here: ableism, bullying, homophobia, and self-unaliving ideation. Feel free to pause and take breaks, but please remember, this was my life. I couldn't hit pause, and I carry the trauma in my brain and body every day. All right, now let me paint a picture of how my brain works. We have words for things now that we didn't have back then. So I'm able to understand and explain how my brain works a lot better than I used to. I started reading when I was 3. I started playing the piano pretty much as soon as I could climb onto the stool. Nowadays, I understand that I have hyperlexia, which in layman's terms means my brain's reading function is on steroids. And I've always been able to learn music from recordings. I can play piano by ear and touch at a much higher level than I can read sheet music. My language function was much closer to normal limits. I started talking around 18 months, and obviously the talking part took care of itself. That's late, don't get me wrong, but some autistic kids don't talk until they're much older, like 3 or 4. When I was little, they weren't really looking for signs of autism in kids with more normal language ability. They weren't factoring in the concept of uneven skill sets. I was above average with language and music, but below average with socializing. I had a few friends in the neighborhood who I'd known since I was like 2. It also helped tremendously that their parents were wonderful people who fully accepted me for who I am. So socializing in my own neighborhood came on a bit more naturally. But making new friends from my class in preschool and kindergarten, that was a lot harder. I will also mention that one of my friend's dads was a Lutheran minister, ELCA Lutheran, so super liberal. It stands for Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, but the word evangelical is misleading. It's very liberal and affirming. They ordain women, they ordain queer people. Um, Sidebar, I briefly went to an ELCA church before converting to Judaism, and even though I decided it ultimately wasn't for me, I did meet some amazing people. All right, so as a child, my autistic brain classified people as church people and non-church people, and this was purely a descriptor. I had no negative associations with religion at that point. I went to a private Montessori style school for grades 1 through 3, and that fit me like a glove. I was reading a good 2 to 3 grade levels ahead of my actual number grade. And this school also did an educational practice called looping, where you are in the same class with at least some of the same kids and the same teacher for more than 1 year. I had the same teacher for grades 1 through 3. As I got older, it became obvious that I was significantly behind in math. As an adult, I learned that I have dyscalculia, aka number dyslexia. In the lower grade levels, I had an easier time with math because you can count on your fingers or count objects. But eventually, I ran out of fingers. And then they threw letters into the mix. I mean, come on. Integration is for people, not letters and numbers. My family moved when I was 9, and then we had no choice but for me to go to public school and hope for the best. My parents and I were apprehensive, but we didn't have any other options. And I want to be clear, my fourth grade teacher was wonderful. I could not have asked for a better teacher for my first year of public school. But when it came to making friends, I felt like I'd crash landed on a different planet. I lost the social circle I'd had since I was 2. And the other kids and even some of their parents made it damn clear that I did not seem normal to them. And gym class was its own hell on earth. I got teased and beaten, and I don't know what all for not walking or running normally. I remember having balls thrown at my face. My clearest memories of this involved basketballs, to the point where both the sport and actual basketball balls became full blown PTSD triggers. Even now, on the off chance I come across one, I usually have a panic attack. And I'm in my late 30s. To make things even more complicated, I was getting really confused about my sexuality. Don't misunderstand me, my family is very liberal and affirming. By the time I was a preteen, my parents had explained to me what gay and straight meant. They they had queer friends. The problem was I liked boys and girls, and at this time, society wasn't talking about that. Being an advanced reader, I pondered over the word bisexual, but never heard anyone actually say it out loud. So I thought that my attraction to both boys and girls was a malfunction caused by whatever was going on with my brain. I know that sounds weird, but that's seriously what I thought. Okay, trigger warning for homophobia and hate crimes for this next part. So I was 10 when Matthew Shepard was unalived, and I found out about it at the time. Remember that I was an advanced reader, and I was constantly going through newspapers for school projects or just to read them because I was curious. And unfortunately, this sometimes led to me seeing and knowing things I maybe shouldn't have. And then I wouldn't tell my parents because I'd be getting afraid I'd be afraid of getting in trouble for reading whatever it was. If you're unfamiliar, Matthew Shepard was a college student with HIV who was the victim of a hate crime, and the scene was brutal. His family chose to have the crime scene photos published to condemn the hate crime, sort of like Mamie Till Mobley with her son Emmett Till's body to condemn the horrors of lynching. Now, by this point, I was getting death threat notes in my desk on a regular basis. I figured that if you could get unalived for being gay, I couldn't let anyone find out that I liked both boys and girls because that meant I was extra broken. I was 29 when I officially realized that I am, in fact, bisexual, and I was 30 when I came out to my family. For any younger people watching this, it's okay to be whatever you are. Whether you're autistic, gay, straight, bi, trans, non binary, or any combination, you are not sick, and there is nothing wrong with you. I'm going to say that again. You are not sick, and there is nothing wrong with you. I wish that was the only time peer violence came up on my radar, but unfortunately, that was only the beginning. Trigger warning for violence. And so we're clear is me getting around the censors, not making light of the subject matter. So I was 11 when Columbine happened. And again, I was getting death threat notes in my desk on a regular basis. And I think my teachers just thought the kids were joking or something. The public schools system's response to Columbine was psychologically damaging, to say the least. They took all the kids they deemed outcasts and misfits, and they used those words to our faces, and they put us in social groups and said that kids like us were more likely to engage in that kind of violence without intervention. Yeah, I was much more likely to be a victim of peer unaliving than a perpetrator. The childhood bullies were the ones who needed some kind of intervention. If they'd gotten it, maybe I wouldn't have these raging mental health issues. Maybe I wouldn't have a ton of young onset medical issues in my 30s from the sheer stress of all of this shit. I did not know that this craptastic Columbine response was a nationwide phenomenon until I talked to another adult bullying survivor who grew up in another state and went through the exact same thing. Unfortunately, are now 1,000 times easier to get, so I hope to God that teachers and parents are taking threats of violence seriously. Okay, trigger for the topic of self-unaliving. It wasn't long after Columbine that I learned what it means to unalive oneself. So that was around the year 2000. My mom was telling me that it had happened to someone she knew fairly well, like a friend's partner or something. And on the outside, I think I said something like, oh my gosh, that's horrible. But on the inside, my thought was, good to know. I don't know how much more of this shit I can take. Okay, I know this is really depressing. It's not a story I wanted to tell, and definitely not one I wanted to live. But this was my life. And this was and is the reality for way too many lost girls. All right, thank you so much for watching. I will be back with part 2 as soon as my mental health allows. And I hope you're all doing well. All right, thanks again for watching. Bye.
If you enjoyed this video, please do me a huge favor and hit the thumbs up. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any future videos. All right, thanks for watching, and I'll be back soon. Like you Bye.